Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1049th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Brooklyn Rail, and it is my extreme joy to be your MC today for a conversation between Mary Lovelace O'Neal and Jessica Holmes. And now I'll introduce Mary and Jessica. A dynamic force in American painting since the 1960s, Mary Lovelace O'Neal has developed a singular visual language that is acutely personal and profoundly political. Drawing on a broad range of influences, from minimalism to abstract expressionism, Lovelace O'Neal's practice is at once worldly, parsing social themes of race and gender, and philosophical, fully immersed in conceptual and metaphysical investigations of joy, exuberance, nature, and the sublime. The formal vitality of Lovelace O'Neal's practice is inextricable from its social, political, and historical urgency, speaking to her experience as a Black woman and reflecting her desire to express these experiences in visual language. And our host today, writer, editor, and critic Jessica Holmes's writing features regularly in Bomb, Hyperallergic, and the Brooklyn Rail, where she edits the ArTonic column as well as our art scene section. Jessica has contributed to many exhibition catalogs, including Judith Braun, My Pleasure, and many others. And previously, she served as editor-in-chief of the arts publication Degree Critical. For nearly 2 decades, she worked for the Calder Foundation, including 6 years as its deputy director. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to get us started. And thank you again to Jessica and Mary for today.
Chloe, thanks so much for that nice introduction. And Mary, thank you for joining me today all the way from Mexico. I'm so happy that you could be here for a chat. I wanted to congratulate you once again on your 3 concurrent shows that are up right now, solo shows at SF MoMA and at Marianne Boesky Gallery, and your work is included in the Whitney Biennial. That's a lot. How does it feel to be everywhere all at once all of a sudden?
It feels great, although I'm somehow enjoying the excitement of everything, because friends that I haven't spoken with, 1 or 2 of them since we were in 1st and 2nd grade. And I remember them and they remember me, and somehow, they have gotten caught in various webs or however you describe the net. And so I've heard from people that I love that I've just sort of lost because I moved out of that town or what have you. I've heard from some of my real heroes, and so it's exciting. I wish, though, I could actually have been there at the openings and all of that kind of excitement you cannot really replicate here in Mexico.
Well, we're grateful to have so much of your work in so many places right now, and it's been a long time coming. Your career spans many decades, about 60 years, is that right?
Yeah, probably a little better. If you count those years when I was a real free artist as a child, the one that marks up the brand newly painted white kitchen wall that's waiting for the table to go back in front of it, and that it's amazing that you ever pick up another crayon. It is surprising that you can even hold it after the punishment you received. So it's I often tell the story of coming up from the Deep South, coming up from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which in a lot of the biographical information is not mentioned. I really grew up most of my life until the 11th grade in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where my father was teaching at the University of Arkansas, which was in those days the agricultural and mechanical. I can't remember all of the names now, but it was not Pine Bluff as a university siting. So that's later, but he was chair of the music department in those days. And in my senior year, my mother decided to move back to Jackson, and he then became chair of the music department and the choir director at Tougaloo College. And for those of you, many of you will know that from your own backgrounds in the civil rights movement, but it was a very, 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 very important place, along with Tougaloo College, along with Howard and Fisk and Tennessee State and those schools in North and South Carolina. So we would come out of the Deep South almost the moment school was out, because there was so much time to be alone as children. And those were very serious times of hangings and lynchings, and even with children. And so almost the minute school was out, my father packed all of our stuff, our skates, our bicycles, our clothes, socks, underwear, the whole thing. There would be these big crates. And we would get on these basically segregated trains, which were that way until they reached the Mason-Dixon line. And then everything opened up. We could go to the dining room where the crystal and everything was so beautiful in those dining rooms in those days. And these hugely handsome Black men who were the service corps of that part of the train. And we had done everything possible, or my parents had done everything possible to keep us relatively quiet in our what do you call it? The not cabins, but
the train cars, or the
yeah. Oh God, I can always think about it. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So for those trips, we had, from even as we were really small children, we had been given coloring books and paper and paste and really beautiful colors and so on, and little books to read and everything to just try to civilize us in that cabin so that we didn't break each other's necks and have horrible fights. And then we were also given lots of gum. You could have as much gum as you could chew, which was just to keep your fat mouth, engaged rather than screaming at your brothers or them screaming at you. So, and I look to my art engagement as going that far back. And I think even when I was, when you're just, I'm not quite sure at what age that is, when you're able to point to things and to walk and you could choose color, you could, they might have your little dresses or whatever out, and you could point to the one that you want. So I think when you ask about the years, I think for probably even more than the 60 years, I admit, when I think about all of those wonderful times, when we moved out of the South, right onto those trains within maybe the second day after school was out, because or kindergarten or whatever it was, because on those campuses, we were doubly isolated from many of the horrors of segregation and Jim Crow, because we were the students of the professors at the colored college. I'll tell you, at the N college, at the nigger college. That's the nigger professor's daughter. So, don't worry about her. But in the meantime, we were, as we get out of the house, maybe by 9 each morning, you had to make certain that your bed was done and you had to have breakfast and all that stuff. But for the rest of the day, with your bicycle and your skates, you were on the road all around the campus. In fact, we got caught smoking once in the basement of the boys' dormitory. It was more than a basement. It was where they had all the pipes and the stuff that sent the heat and the water. And one of the kids started throwing up, and there happened to be a student passing by. And he called one of the parents, and it was a mess. I thought I would never get away from that. I had to come directly from school into the house.
Oh my
And
goodness.
permission to go into the back, yard to play or plant. It was, and I thought I would be married, with that punishment in place. So anyway, we would arrive in either Chicago or Gary or Milwaukee to a whole nother life that you didn't realize was so different. It was just another place where you had all of these children you played with who were from everywhere imaginable, from every country, because Gary was a big steel town. So was Chicago, with all of the, all of the construction that went on, and the big meat houses. I don't remember what you call those, but there was employment. Everyone basically who wanted a job could get one, and sort of the beginning of the unions breaking down so that other than white men could be employed. Okay, I know I'm going on and on. So you just have to stop me. This is Friday, so I have many Friday stories. At any rate, it's just, I think those early days when I could be given a crayon or given a pencil, I was attached to that. I think also that it may have had something to do with my being dyslexic, and a way of kind of expressing myself. In those days, they didn't see it as it was a disease. It was just this dumb child. She doesn't know this and she doesn't know that, and she can't paint inside. They sent a letter home, I found out later, that said there was something wrong with me because I refused to paint inside it. There used to be, many of you too younger to remember, but there was a machine, and it turned and turned, and it would turn out pictures of houses or bowls of fruit or bunnies, and they would give us crayons and so on to work with those. And I just took it to heart, and I did what I thought was interesting. Right. But it turns out that was a problem, that you didn't stay inside the lines and so on. I think it was Mr. Driscoll that wrote a piece about that. Anyway, tell me, Jessica, whenever you're tired. So that's sort of that accounts for the 82 years, basically, when I could walk and choose things and manipulate things.
Well, I'm glad you continued to color outside of the lines. I guess you kept doing that in college, right? You moved on to college and studied art, and I understand you were quite involved in the civil rights movement at the time too. How did you balance that?
I'm not sure that I did, you know, such good balancing. But it turned out, you know, that I had friends from basically these two big groups. There were the Greeks, you know, all the fraternity and sorority folks. And then there were those of us who became involved in the student movement and the civil rights movement. And in later years, there was a crossover, but in the early days of the student movement, they you know, it's like young women like myself have been sent there to, you didn't have to become a doctor. You were there to marry a doctor or a lawyer or somebody who's going to have lots of money. And as they say, I didn't get the memo. So I ended up being the girlfriend of this boy, Stokely Carmichael. And so, but I had also been nominated. The frats, the fraternities had these queens in their courts and stuff. So one year, I was on that court, and you know, and then they would always talk about who was going to be the next queen and so on. And so there were lots of people who objected to me because I was very dark skinned, and so this was the kind of changeover in many ways that you know, that universities and colleges and high schools and what have you were starting to think differently about who's who. And so Black is Beautiful, that age of change, which was a very important age. At any rate, there was, if you broke Howard into these two factions, that's kind of what you ended up with, those fraternities and those women who had come there to do, you know, serious work. And I was just sort of bouncing about, you know, not expecting that I needed to have a job or a husband. So I was just, you know, but I managed it because I had deep friendships within both of those groups. And I things were not actually wonderful because there was this great rivalry in some ways over in those early years. And I guess by the time I was being graduated from that prison, things had changed a lot. Like you when I arrived there, you couldn't be in a car with a man who wasn't your father. And my father was getting these letters. He just wrote them and said, she can be in the car with whoever the fuck she wants to be. Don't send me another one of these letters. And one of the reasons I hadn't gone to Spelman was they said, no, we're not going to send you there and have them send you home the next week because you didn't come to the dorm on time, or they caught you with some other kids drinking whiskey on the plaza, you know, that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, we had professors like, I think right now of Toni Morrison, one of my great heroes, and the artists who were our Alan Gordon, Oliver Jackson, you know, these were people who had an inkling and sometimes knew my work a lot better than I did, knew what I was up to, and so I could have talks about it. And there was another woman at the Art Institute, and she and I became friends. God, I just lost her name. Let me see, I don't know how many of you are old enough to know her work. She did a gigantic painting that probably killed her because she was using lead paint
Oh, was it Jay DeFeo that you're talking about?
Jay
Yeah.
DeFeo, absolutely. And she and I were great friends.
Oh,
And she had that kind of aesthetic and that kind of verve that I did, you know, and so we were who we were against whatever that was. Yeah, Jay, she was
whoop.
quite a good friend. Let's see. So, the reason I moved away um, from the Black work had a great deal to do with the fact that it was so dangerous, and I knew that, you know, when I started using it. But my work clothes, my corduroys, my shirts, you know, all of my work clothes would just rot, because this is like working in a coal mine. I'd look like that when I left the studio in the early morning, or you know, or morning, and go through the streets, and people would look at me like, "What on earth? You know, what happened to you?" So yeah, I'd have to get home and then oil myself, so
Mhm.
so that I could get this stuff off, you know, because otherwise I'm just scraping and, you know, scraping my skin. So you can imagine what was going on with my lungs. I
Oh,
had also grown very weary of the way I was working, which was pressing this stuff into the canvas, so that it would, so that this substance would capture the threads,
mhm.
you know, the fiber. And so that settled two things with that, those questions, those theoretical questions that were floating around in those days, like flatness. And, you know, I had some other issues, like a lot of the poets were not satisfied that I wasn't making more figurative stuff. And so therefore my work wasn't Black enough for them. So I solved those two problems. I made the flattest work possible. And so that settled that argument with those white boys. And with those Black men, it settled another argument that this ought to be Black enough for you. And you know, you know, these are funny stories now, or funny things that happened over the years. But I was really tired of working on the floor, having my clothes eaten up, and
Mhm.
having to drag these pieces by myself and pin them up and then work on them again on the wall.
Mhm.
And the walls were, again, a hard surface, with me just banging into that with my hands or my brush or
Right.
whatever. And I decided that I really needed to go back to fluid paints.
I see.
And so it's like if you could open one of those lines up and open that canvas up, that Cooney-esque color was, you know, riding around under there. Or
Right.
Jake Lawrence, all of those, you know, all of those sharp
Yeah.
colors that were happening there was all there waiting for me to find my way back. And that's, you know, essentially that's the color was just released.
Mhm.
And so the story with the whales fucking is that one of these women who was my student and I went out to one of those city beaches in San Francisco,
Uh-huh.
and we were walking, you know, in the sand, and something you know, drew my attention. I looked to the right, and there was all of this water in the air, and the sunlight coming through it like jewels had just been, you know, thrown up in the sky. And it was, of course, these whales. You know, once I settled down to see what was going on, breaching and bringing tons and tons of water, you know, up into the air and into the sunlight. And so it was that started me thinking. I mean, the whales were on their way north at that time of year.
Mhm.
And so I was just very lucky. So I just started thinking about them. My God, And there came that idea about the the amounts of water that they must be moving, you
Right.
know.
Mhm.
And so I started thinking like, God, whales fucking, can you imagine the amount of water that they are displacing, you
A
know?
lot,
And
tons.
the yeah, right, and the force of it. And so, again, all of these things, it's not like I went home and immediately started that series, but what had happened to me became a part of my, as I said to you, I used to draw maybe 10, 5, 6, 8, 10, maybe more.
Mhm.
I would make drawings in a day. And so, and I started moving the charcoal in ways that I had seen those arcs as they came up out of
Mm.
the water, as they breached. And then again, I started thinking, ah, and so since I had said I was never going to work uh, with the black pigment again, I had found someone who would make stretcher bars and so on. And I got down to business again. What I needed was this breathing
Mhm.
that took place between the canvas and me, the canvas going in and exhaling in and out as I was. And so in a way that was kind of timid,
Right.
because I had been so accustomed to kind of intellectualizing my process, figuring the math out
Yeah.
and figuring out where things went before I put down black stuff, because there was no way to take it off.
Right.
That was it. That's how it existed. And um, so gradually I saw those movements coming into my drawings, and then I thought, okay. And one day, I don't know how many months later, because I went through a period where it just wasn't working, and I just wasn't painting, let's put it like that. And then at some point I got, I guess, my nerve up again, and my need to paint.
Mm.
And I started, just with making these shapes. I think you'll see them in that in those whales that are in your. I can't see anything anymore, and I'm afraid to touch anything.
Oh, that's okay. Well, one
I
of those
see.
whale paintings was chosen for the Whitney Biennial. Is that right?
Yes,
You have
yes.
one of the things that struck me about that installation is that there are three paintings from three very different decades of your work, and it almost offers like a mini retrospective to viewers going to see the Whitney. Uh, how did you select those three to be featured?
Jessica, I didn't
Ah,
select those. In fact, those three pieces were chosen by Meg and Chrissy, the curators of the show. And I really wasn't pleased. I was so excited about the new work. I wanted to show that, or I wanted to show a series of the desert women, because that was another experience that led to work.
right.
Um, yeah, and so I I I I cannot take credit for that mini retrospective. That was the will of the curators. And actually I hated it because I had another idea. But it's not my show.
Right.
I was chosen, and I should be very happy about that. And whatever they wanted to show, fine. And it turned out that it was a very, very good decision uh, that they made about how they wanted to see the work. And I'm so grateful
Mhm.
to having sense enough to shut my big mouth and let them do it.
For what it's worth, it is one of the most memorable rooms in the biennial for me, and I spent a lot of time with the painting. She now calls herself Sahara, which just is very moving. Did that painting, did you derive that from your travels?
Yes, yes, Jessica. My husband, Toro, who's really a fantastic painter, uh, and had said to me that he was going to take me to his home so that I could see this desert. He's Chilean, and so he was basically, in exile. Although he had been living in many places, he had lived in South Africa. They kicked him out because he was going to be the great revolutionary, and they had on tape him saying at a meeting that what we need, right, he's in South Africa, what we need to do is to, bomb some of these stores and do this and that. And so I think it was the very next day they came to his house and they said, Mr. Toro, don't say anything. We have you on tape. They showed him the tape. He said, we're asking that you pack up and you will be on the first thing out of here tomorrow morning.
Wow.
And so there was a big article in the newspaper that said one way ticket for Toro. We have the article somewhere, but so I met him, and he promised to take me, and in fact, the time came when Pinochet was, pushed out of his office, or however that happened. And, there's this big plebiscite. And so it was finally time that people could go back home, all of these exiles. He had been living in Chile, not in Chile, sorry, in Sweden. And they had been very welcoming to, those people who had to get out of Chile before something awful happened. And so we were among those, or I was with him, and he was among those expats who returned to Chile. And I started working in a commune, basically, Taller 99, which was started by Nemesio Antunes. He and Mata and that whole group of people. In fact, Antunes had been, what do you call it? Like you're an ambassador, but they don't call you that, of art, something.
A diplomat.
Yeah, it's in the diplomatic, that group of, what is it? I just can't think of that title. It's a very familiar one. At any rate, and so he said, you must come and let us see your work. And so I did, and I was accepted into that group of printers. And I learned just tons of stuff. I had been someone who hated printmaking, but again, out of nowhere, Bob Blackburn from that print shop in New York. Yeah, so you guys know him. Yeah. And so Bob had come to a show that Joe Overstreet had done at Kinkillaby House in downtown 2nd Street. And so after that, or during the opening at that show, Bob said to me, how would you like to come and print in my studio? I said, oh no, Bob, I don't know anything about printing. I would not like to do that. I had a horrendous time at Howard, and Mr. Wells, who was also a very famous printer, and Heiter, he had worked with that guy. And I would do things, just dumb shit that happened in Paris too, that I would have a plate that I had finally gotten ready to go into the acid. inevitably there would be a brand new bath of acid. I would put my plate in, and their problem started. Because I remembered this time very well, because I put it in there and I was going to go out to dinner with some friends. It was, I think, a Friday evening. So I put the plate in. And I guess Mr. Wells came in on Saturday morning or Sunday. For some way he was there during off hours, so to speak. And he found this just syrupy substance in, yeah, I just, so when I came to class, I think it was on a Tuesday, I think I saw him on Tuesdays, I don't remember. He said, "Miss Lovelace, I'd like to speak with you."
Oh no.
And that was it, and so I was like, I hate this shit. I didn't want to do it anyway. And more than that, I had gotten a bunch of Archer's watercolor papers. I have no idea how over that same weekend I had gotten a whole thread of red paint that went down the whole side of that.
Yes.
We call it ring of. So he said, "Miss Lovelace, don't you come back here again." And I think you should, don't. I never want to see you again. So I said, "Oh, okay, okay, Mr. Wells, I'm so sorry. I really." So then Mr. Driscoll, of course, heard about it.
Uh-huh.
And Miss Jones was like, "Well, kick her out." And Mr. Driscoll said, "Look, Mr. Wells, we have to take care of these students. Sometimes they're not really ready to be here.
Right.
But, but we must take care of them until they are ready to accept what we're trying to teach them to do, blah, blah, blah." So Mr. Wells said, "All right, she can come here, but she can't have anything but crayons. She is not to try to print anything. I don't even want to see her. Tell her to come here in off hours. At the end of the semester, I want to see 18 pieces, blah, 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 blah." So it's like he couldn't be any more done with me than I was done with him. And I had absolutely no respect for printers or printmaking. I mean, it was just awful. So when Bob asked me that, I said, "Well, I really don't know anything about printmaking, and I'm so sorry. I just wouldn't be interested." He said, "I didn't ask you to teach a class." I said, "Would you like to come down here and do some prints?" And I said, "Oh, well, perhaps, Bob, that sounds like a good idea." I had no intentions of doing that. But we went out, and there's a big street fair for a saint that happens in the summer. Saint somebody, I can never remember his name when I'm trying to tell these stories. But anyway, Joe and a bunch of us went out and we ate hot dogs and hamburgers and drank martinis and beer, and finally we were sitting on the curb drinking whiskey out of the bottles. It's just horrible, horribly wonderful. And so
Sounds amazing.
yeah, so anyway, I'm losing track. Anyway, I went home after that, and I woke up at some point that morning with this horrendous hangover and headache. And I thought, I have got to get up and earn my breath. And I'm gonna go down there. And so I took a shower, and I guess I had a couple of aspirins or something and some food, and I went down there. And what a magical experience. And I have been in love with printmaking since, since. And all of it, any of it. I don't mind the labors of an etching, and all of the surprises with litho, because if you spit on it, you can fuck it up. So I loved it. At any rate, I joined that group down there in Santiago, and I learned many things there, and I loved it. And there, unlike in Bob's shop, you had to do everything for yourself or with a partner or someone. And so I learned to wash my own stones. I learned to choose my stone, learned how to get it onto, a big table with rollers on it to move it, and just and to wash that stone. The water running, and there's kind of a rhythm that you develop. It's like a romance, really.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's that part of the story. But it was nearing the end of our trip. We had been there about 2 months, and the summer was over, and I think I had sabbatical as a part of it or something. Anyway, it was time to go back to the States almost. And I said, Tori, you still have not taken me to the desert. And we did go there to the Atacama, which is the driest desert in the world.
Oh, wow.
And the things we saw, I can't begin to tell you. And we had a guide who was my nephew, and Toro had other interests, and he was off looking at something, and so my nephew Felipe took me into the what's it called? Well, it's like the driest dead. It's like, what's that? The dead.
The dead. I'm not sure, actually.
Like in California,
The
that desert. What's it called?
Oh, Death Valley.
Anyway,
Death Valley.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Valle del Mort. And
Yeah.
so he took me there, and he said, you have to be very, very quiet. He says, I know you don't think there's anything here. You can only see these few bushes and this and that. He said, but I want you to stretch out and put your ear to the ground. And you hear all of this noise, really. And then he said, and watch, just watch, look. And there would be little insects and small little things like scorpions, not really, but some stuff. And they were kicking dirt and taking care of their young and putting them back in little holes and stuff. So it's just this incredible place.
Yeah.
And we saw what looked like icicles. We happened to get to the desert when it was when the moon was there. That that cycle of the moon,
Right.
when the moon was full. And so anyway, just so many fabulous things. So anyway, making a long story short, that was quite an experience. I can feel it to this day.
Amazing.
We came back to Oakland, and we decided to have folk over for dinner because we hadn't seen anyone for 3 or 4 months, any of our friends and other painters and so on. And there was a baseball game. If any of you remember, we had a terrible, terrible earthquake. And the bridge came down, and we had gone that same day into San Francisco to get our visas to go to Egypt. We had we were going to Morocco and to Egypt. And so we got back, and we were preparing food, and there was this horrendous earthquake, and we didn't really know it, except that our house almost fell down. We knew that, but we didn't know the extent of the disaster. That the Bay Bridge had cracked, and it was horrendous. Again, making a long story short, so we couldn't leave when we wanted to, but once there was a connection to the airport and blah blah blah, we were able to get to North Africa and to the Sahara. And the difference, with just within weeks, I was in one desert and then in another.
Wow.
And it was like I could know the difference. It was like the Sahara is sort of soft and rolling and voluptuous, and the Atacama is hard and rocky and so on. And so I always say, at night with all those stars in the Sahara, you feel like, oh, those other people down the way must be with Jesus. You know, it's just like the whole thing was so biblical.
Hmm. Mary.
And so that's how that Sahara piece starts, and not that particular one. There are a number in there. I can't see anymore now, but I if you look at that figure, it seems to straddle two places, and that's what it felt like to me when I got back and started trying to work. And that was my second time in Morocco, but my first time in Egypt. So the desert made sense to me in a way it hadn't the first time when I was there alone. The second time I was there, of course, was with Paul. So that series started with my interest in these women, like what they were wearing, what they were doing. There's a piece in the show at Marianne's gallery where which is called what is it called? It's called Roofs, where women and cats rule, because so much activity for women takes place on the roofs in these desert places, like parts of Morocco and parts of Egypt, and so and in the cities and so on. There is that territory where they are cooking, they are cutting the hair of each other and the children, they're dyeing hair, they're washing and chopping vegetables. It's there where women do what they do, and they fuss and fight with each other and that kind of thing. And so these pieces, and it's actually a bigger series with lots of drawings, because as we would cross the desert in some places, just walking and taking pictures, women especially, would just pop out of nowhere with baskets and stuff on their heads, and stuff to be traded or sold, or what. It's a whole, it's like a whole zone. And so those portraits, which I didn't realize were essentially portraits until I had done a number of them, I was talking about myself in those places. And so that one is one, and where she ends up calling herself Sahara, of course, after the desert. So that's just, some insight into that.
Mary, I could listen to your stories all day.
And I could tell them all day.
I think we have some questions from the audience that are eager to talk with you for a few minutes. Is it all right if we pass those along to you now?
Yeah, sure, Jessica. I'm doing very well with with my energy, so I'm good.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. It's wonderful to hear you speak. You've got so many amazing stories, and I think our audience has some amazing questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mary and Jessica. That was really, really special, and such a pleasure to listen to. Thank you so, so much for your generosity in telling us those stories, Mary.
You're welcome.
We have a few great questions, but first I want to read you a comment that came early on while you were speaking, Mary, from a former student of yours, Erica, who was in the audience today. Erica said, "Hi, Mary. I'm sadly having to leave early, but I wanted to share that I was your MFA student at UC Berkeley from 1991 to 93, and I love seeing your well-deserved success, and I can't wait to see your show at Marianne Boesky Gallery." So I wanted to share that with you to get us started. But the first question today is going to be from Karen in the audience. Karen, I'll give you a moment to unmute here to ask your question. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Okay,
great,
so that's
great.
Karen, my agent.
Hi, Mary.
So is this a trick question,
No,
Karen?
it's not a trick question. Not a
Okay.
trick question at all. But I wanted to just ask you, can you please tell us how your work from the Adventures and Misadventures series evolved into your new body of work that you created in your Mexico studio? Could you tell us if there's any connectivity there?
Um, you know, Karen, as I have said, the work morphs. You know, what happened here in Mexico is, on the one hand, in and of itself, but it comes from all of the things that we've been talking about, all the way back to the Black work of my youth. And so, you know, not even with the whales, which came about in such a dramatic way, and in a very, very direct way. But I was ready for it because I had things I needed to say with fluid paint, which was about water, and which ends up being about whipping that paint and allowing those shapes to move through what might be water, you know, or to fuck in those spaces where a calf is born, you know, and how all of that takes place. So I can only say that one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And that series that you're talking about, Chagall and the Joy House, kind of came out of nowhere on the one hand, because it was just some silliness that I happened to think about. And that particular show was made in Santiago in Chile. And I just started working with, because I draw all the time, always have. And so I just started making these characters that I thought would be in a whorehouse. And I have had a lot of thoughts about whorehouses and prostitution and some of that, some of those things. So when I arrived here in Mexico, my husband had built an incredible studio, really, really a beautiful space for me. And it's frightening because it's like a blank canvas, you know, that taunts you. Like, I'm better than you are. I dare you to touch me. And so I just, at some point, I had sat around in that space. I had, you know, talked to myself down there. I had looked at all of the paints, and I had gotten some new things, like some new hammers and, you know, and paper and, you know, just stuff. But everything was so pristine, so virginal, that it was hard to do anything. And finally, I got the courage up to do it, because I had a really good team of assistants here, which I had never had before, and which I needed because I've become more and more disabled over the years, and there are things I just cannot do. I can't carry a big canvas from one side to another, or hang it on a wall, or knock the nails in. All of that I could do for myself. So I had some canvases made, and they had been gessoed a certain way. And finally, I just had to hit it. And I did it with gusto. And, you know, I started drawing and working with my hands, because I don't any longer have a whole bunch of palettes around the studio on wheels that I can move around to. I just can't do it. So in that sense, I take big pots and make big pots of color, one color or another. And and so these things just started coming to me, and I didn't block them out. I didn't have any intellectual reason to do it. I didn't have any spiritual reason to not let things happen, and they did, and so there are these creatures that I'm not sure of. They, in some instances, have some characteristics that work back to Chagall and the Joy House and some of those characters. Um, um, and but these are different. They're different. They're things I had never seen before, except so much is incubating in the back of your head, in your mind. And so it just all starts to come. And some of it comes out very fast, and it's like you're just laughing, and you're enjoying it, you're licking the paint, and you're rolling on the canvas, not literally any longer, because I can't jump up and down on my chairs and ladders as I once was able to do. But I can still actually get up on a ladder and work the top of the canvas, or wait for a tour or someone to come and put them down on the floor for me. It's just that I have to work differently now, but so joyously. And so I think the Chagall and the Joy House. I don't know if everyone knows what a Joy House is. A Joy House is a whorehouse, and so a lot of that work I did in Santiago, and I also did on the beach in Cancun in I get it mixed up with Cancun here in Mexico, but this is Cancun in Chile. I don't know, Karen, if that really answers the questions, except to say that these things morph, and I'm
Well, thank you.
anxious to see what's going to happen soon.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that question. And thank you for that answer, Mary. I'm going to ask the last question today, if you'll have it, Mary, and it's a good segue from Karen's. I'm curious if you can give us a little bit more insight into your studio process, and I'm curious how long your paintings take you. And I noticed that many of the paintings in Marianne Boesky are diptychs or triptychs, and they tend to be multi-chapter, and I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit more about that. Like, do you know that there are going to be multiple parts to each work from the beginning, or are you adding as you expand beyond your original image? And what does that look like for you in the studio?
Jessica, I don't know. This was just, this is a kind of magic that occurs that's attached to what you've been doing for 80, for 60, 70 years. And so it starts out, it might even start out with just a line, or just a blue spot. And the next thing you know, you've got 4 5x7s all chattering and talking about something. And so at this point, you're pretty much just an observer as the things happen. And so as you decide that, oh, well, you guys need even more space to talk and to run about and to come in and out of. And so you're right. And both Karen and Marianne have been to that studio when things were morphing and becoming a quadriptych. And then the decision gets made that, they don't need that much space. And in fact, this particular 5x7 won't work with anyone. It's that 5x7 that says, I don't need these people. keep them away from me. I don't care if I am their sister or their brother. I want to run my own show. Do not put me in with any of them. I need to be alone. And so that piece comes out, or it's been put away and into a pile of paintings that are coming and going, thinking through them and putting them up, and they're not being cooperative, and you're putting them away, which is actually what happened with the piece at the Biennale, was that I had put those 4 pieces away because nobody wanted to cooperate. And then I was looking for something else, and as we took them out, those 5x7s came out backwards, and I thought, my God, look at that, and it was like there was this spirit, this energy that one, coming back, 4, 3, 2, 1, they all came out, and they had all decided what they were and how they could be together. It was just an incredible thing. And so then I went back into it and started to make, some joining things and some things they could all agree about. Yeah, okay. We all say, yeah, you can make purple plants for us to eat. And so that's the only way I can explain it. It's magic. Painting is magic, and it is maddening, and it is full of grace and redemption, and it has a life of its own. And I'm just so pleased to be able to participate in it. It's my stuff. I don't have to make it any way but the way it comes and goes in my own head, except for the remarks from my husband, who can be overbearing from time to time. Does that answer your question, Jessica?
That was an absolutely beautiful answer to my question, Mary. Thank you so, so much. I think that's going to conclude our Q&A series today, but Jessica has selected a poem to read to close us out today, and so I'm going to pass the mic back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Chloe. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. And Mary, most of all, thank you to you for this wonderful conversation. I thought, excuse me, to close out, I would read the poem Humpbacks by poet Mary Oliver. With all of the discussion of whales, it was something that was sticking in my head as I was preparing for this talk. And I think it also captures something of the life force that's so intrinsic to Mary's paintings. And just before I begin reading, I really encourage everyone who's able to go see her work at Marianne Boesky or at SF MoMA or the Biennial, or all 3 if you can. It's really moving and colorful and exuberant, and don't miss. So this is Humpbacks by Mary Oliver. There is all around us this country of original fire. You know what I mean. The sky, after all, stops at nothing, so something has to be holding our bodies in its rich and timeless stables, or else we would fly away. Off Stellwagen, off the Cape, the humpbacks rise, carrying their tonnage of barnacles and joy. They leap through the water, they nuzzle back under it, like children at play. They sing too, and not for any reason you can't imagine. 3 of them rise to the surface near the bow of the boat, then dive deeply, their huge scarred flukes tipped to the air. We wait, not knowing just where it will happen. Suddenly, they smash through the surface. Someone begins, shouting for joy, and you realize it is yourself as they surge upward, and you see for the first time how huge they are as they breach and dive and breach again through the shining blue flowers of the split water, and you see them for some unbelievable part of a moment against the sky. like nothing you've ever imagined, like the myth of the fifth morning galloping out of darkness, pouring heavenward, spinning. Then they crash back under those black silks, and we all fall back together into that wet fire. You know what I mean. I know a captain who has seen them playing with seaweed, swimming through the green islands, tossing the slippery branches into the air. I know a whale that will come to the boat whenever she can and nudge it gently along the bow with her long flipper. I know several lives worth living. Listen, whatever it is you try to do with your life, nothing will ever dazzle you like the dreams of your body. Its spirit, longing to fly while the deadweight bones toss their dark mane and hurry back into the fields of glittering fire, where everything, even the great whale, throbs with song.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Jessica, that was so beautiful. Thank you so, so much for reading that to close us out today. And thank you to you and to Mary for today's dialogue, which was just an absolute pleasure to listen to and to be in this space with all of you for. I would also like to thank Maria and Marianne at Marianne Boesky Gallery, who have been just so, so supportive and helpful in preparing for today's event. Kelly as well on that team. I would like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor the NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this conversation shortly. And I hope you enjoy some of the other conversations that we've had over the last few years on the NSE there. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation between Masinisa Salmani and CJ Salapari on the occasion of A Fault in the Mirage at Jane Lombard Gallery in New York. And as is Rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today. And thank you to Mary, and to Jessica.
Thank you, everyone. Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much, Mary.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Mary.
you.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Congratulations.
We love
Jess.
you.
Wow.
Such a beautiful,
Cheers.
beautiful work.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica, thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure.
Congratulations,
Amazing.
Mary.
Bye.